Hello, and welcome to Stuart Saturday Live with me, your hostess, Andrea Zuvich, the 17th century lady. My guest today will be author Christine de Melo, who has written numerous historical fiction works, including some set in the 17th century. We'll be speaking with her in a few minutes. First up, however, we have the 17th century news, so to speak. We have an update about the Powick Bridge situation that we covered earlier in the year. According to a BBC News West Midlands report out from the 10th of July, repairs to the bridge should begin this summer. The historic bridge, which featured in the British Civil Wars, including the skirmish at Powick Bridge in 1642 and later in the Battle of Worcester in 1651, was badly damaged after flooding led to a partial collapse. I'm sure that those of us who are concerned about this situation will look forward to the repairs, and I'll keep you updated as to any further developments regarding this situation. In other news, there are some new books out. I'd like to congratulate Nadine Ackerman and Pete Langman on their book, Spycraft. Fantastic stuff. And my daughter has been quite intrigued with the cover on the hardback, which has some glow-in-the-dark features. I greatly admire both of these authors, so I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Next, I've been given an advanced review copy of Costanza by Rachel Blackmore. And this book is a novel, and it's set in 17th century Rome and centers on the scandalous affair between Costanza Piccolomini and the sculptor Gian Lorenzo Bernini. I'm a huge fan of Bernini's work, as many of you are as well. And from what I gather from the blurb, I may end up liking him a little less. At any rate, I'm looking forward to reading this. And I hope to do so before the book launches in early August, and I'll post my review of this and other books in the weeks to come. And last but not least, my own book, Ravenous, A Life of Barbara Villiers, Charles II's most infamous mistress, is due out at the end of the month. I have been thinking about what to do regarding the launch, and I may do something live streamed like this instead of one in person, because there are so many readers and friends and colleagues that live all over the world that to have one an in-person event would not be the best, I think. And I'd like as many people to share in it as possible. So we'll see. But I do have an in-person talk at 1620's house in Donnington-le-Heath, Leicestershire, at the end of August. I'll let you know when you can book your tickets, and of course I'll be happy to sign copies of any of my books that you bring to the event. All right then, well, it's time for our history chat. My guest today is an art historian who specializes in Florence from the beginning to mid-15th century and Naples in the 17th and 18th centuries. She has lived and worked in Florence as a history tour guide too. She is the author of well over a dozen historical novels, including The Apprentice, Love and Scandal in the Kingdom of Naples, which begins in 1600 and follows the fascinating story of a young artist who makes a courageous choice that leads to adventure, love, and religious and political turmoil. Joining us live from Porto Alegre, Brazil, please welcome Christine de Melo.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's such a pleasure to be here and such an honor to be interviewed by you.
Thank you so much for coming. I've been looking forward to having a chat with you for a while. I mean, we've known each other for over a year now, haven't we? I really enjoyed your book, The Apprentice, and we'll go into that a bit more later. But you specialize in certain periods of Italian history. For the purposes of this history chat, I'd like to focus on the early modern period, specifically the 17th century, please. Could you please tell us what Italy was like at that time? Was it Italy as we know it today, or city-states, independent or unified?
Italy, as we know it today, did not exist. It was a combination of city-states and kingdoms. And it wasn't until the 19th century that they unified. By 1861, most of the city-states had joined, and it wasn't fully joined until 1871 when Rome came in, and it had to be by force. They did not have a unified language, so the first time we see language in Italian written is by Dante Alighieri, and he wrote in the common vernacular, which was Tuscan. And then in the 16th century, Tuscan was the language of the books that were written. And so they chose Tuscan to be the national language to unify the country in the 19th century. And that is what the Italian that we speak today. But with that said, all of the city-states kept their dialects. For example, if you go to Venice or if you go to Sicily, they will speak the national Italian, but they will also speak the dialect, which is something that I can't even understand. And every region of Italy has their own music, their own cuisine, their own history. Some have their own architecture. It's such a fascinating country.
Oh, it's amazing. I didn't know that. There are so many interesting bits of information there. Yes, I think we think of Italy now as it's just one area, but that's true. I have family who live in Pescara, and also my ancestors were from the island of Brač, which
Oh,
is
okay.
from Croatia. Now it's an island. And that was all taken over by the Republic, the Venetians, right?
Ancient
So
Republic, yeah.
yeah. And so there must have been some cultural crossover there as well.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
yeah. Well, that's really amazing. What kind of dialects do you speak? Do you understand
Oh,
several of them?
no, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't understand any of the dialects. No, I speak
Okay.
Italian.
Mhm.
I speak Portuguese. I speak Italian, but I don't speak any of the dialects. They're too difficult.
Wow. Um, now, did you always speak Italian when you did you
No,
grow up
no,
speaking it?
no, no, no. I'm not Italian at all. I get asked that question all the time. I'm a first generation Azorean. My parents immigrated to the United States, and so Portuguese was my first language. Um, I learned Italian after graduating college. My interest was Manuelino architecture of Portugal in the 15th century, and I ended up working in Florence with Renaissance architecture, and I learned
Wow.
Italian. I learned Italian, working in Italy. It's like
That
a
is so
baptism by
awesome.
fire.
But that's amazing. That must have been
Oh,
really hard, but amazing to be able to be exposed to that and to live and work in Florence. Amazing. Um,
yes.
let's talk about your book, The Apprentice, which is set in Florence and Naples, among a few other places in Italy, during the early years of the 17th century. Um, could you tell us a bit about life in Florence and Naples in the early 17th century, please?
Well, I know that my book starts off in Florence in the 17th century, but there really wasn't much going on. As you know, the humanistic movement known as the Renaissance blossomed fully in Florence in the 15th century, and then still went strong in the 16th century with artists like Michelangelo, Bronzino, Buontalenti. But by the turn of the 17th century, the concentration of artistic innovation, once held by Florence, shifts to Rome. And it shifts to the south of Italy because that's where the new style emerges called Baroque. And so Naples in the 17th century is an extremely exciting place. It's dominated by Spain, okay? It's dominated by the Kingdom of Spain, and it's incredibly wealthy. You have these viceroys, these Spanish viceroys who are spending loads of money building these sumptuous Baroque palaces and the churches. And it's funny because when you compare the Renaissance architecture of like Brunelleschi and you see these the gray Pietra Serena stones of his churches with the white plain walls, everything very mathematical, clean and crisp. And then you go to the Baroque, which Baroque is, it's overwhelming with decoration. And in 17th century Naples, there's also some strange cult-like things going on. Aside from the theme of my book, you have this death cult that is still around today. Like the last time I was in Napoli, I visited this strange burial site with these skulls. It's all skulls, candles, and they decorate with flowers, and they believe still to this day that if you keep the skull, the cranium of your loved one, and you whisper the prayers into where the air, your ear would have been, that the prayers go very quickly to God. So there's a lot of this macabre, this superstition going on in Naples that blends with Catholicism. That's what makes it so unique and interesting. I'm sorry, my earbud keeps falling out. So
that's fine.
But yeah,
wow, that's incredibly interesting. And I was taken aback by some of the macabre elements in your book, and it's intriguing to hear that it's still going on now. Going back to art, you've mentioned some lovely names. What were some of the big names in Naples, in the art world?
Well, you mentioned one of them, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who was the son of Pietro Bernini, who was considered the father of the Baroque style. They thought that the oval, was the perfect shape, and that's why you see so many oval churches. And as you know, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, to me, he's one of my favorite all-time sculptors. I know I lived in Florence, and it's like a betrayal because everybody there thinks Michelangelo is the head honcho, and he is. He's a genius. But no one handled stone like Bernini, in my humble opinion. He turned it to butter. And of course, there was Caravaggio, who I mentioned in the book as well. Caravaggio, he was as dramatic as his artwork. He made chiaroscuro. Nobody could depict chiaroscuro, light and fire, in a painting like he could, to the point that you can almost feel the warmth emanating from the canvas. In Bernini's work, you see a lot of he did paintings, he did some sculpture, but his best works right now are, of course, in the Galleria della Borghese in Rome, where I saw the talent, the way he depicts flesh in the Rape of Persephone, or the way, if you've seen Apollo and Daphne, the moment that Apollo is grabbing Daphne and she calls out to Zeus, and he turns his daughter into a laurel tree, and the leaves on the fingers are made of marble, but they're so thin that light can get through it. And you have to have a skill that's beyond genius to do this kind of work. And then Caravaggio, who was very active in Naples, he led a very he was arrogant, he was a drunkard, he was a rebel, he was boisterous, he fought with people. I mean, there was always fights, and he ended up in killing. In 1606, he killed a Roman pimp, and there was a death warrant out for him, and he fled. He was self-exiled to escape death. And he was found dead in 1610 under very mysterious circumstances, which makes me believe that it was some type of vendetta. But I can't say that for sure. I'm not going on record. But they're very interesting artists, very interesting lives that these men led.
Yes. Caravaggio has this reputation for being very violent. And of course, some of his famous works have some violence in them. But he was, as you said, his chiaroscuro and the vibrancy of the colors that he used are incredible.
Active poses, very active, very lots of dynamics, very dramatic.
Yeah, yes, incredible. I was able to see some of his pieces in person sometime long ago, but I've never gone to the Borghese, and I've heard wonderful things about that gallery, and I really want to go.
Oh, you should.
So
It's my favorite museum in Rome.
that's great. Um, are there any specifically 17th century history areas that you would recommend
In
in
Naples.
Rome? Well,
Oh, in Rome.
maybe in Rome for now.
Well, Rome. I love the Galleria delle Borghese. I love the catacombs. That's a very interesting. They have an ossuary as well. Um, uh, Rome. It's everywhere you look in Rome. Of course, you have the Colosseum. You have the Vatican. It's Santa Maria
Yeah.
Maggiore. St. John the Lateran, all these old churches. The best thing to do, and I tell people this, when you go to Italy, yes, you should have a list of the things you want to see. But the best thing you do is just leave the map in the hotel and just walk around, because I have found so many things that I had no idea existed that are not on the maps, that are not, on Rick Steves, that are not on TripAdvisor. And it's best for you to just walk and keep your eyes open and discover things yourself.
Oh, those are great tips. That's fantastic. Uh, Some in our audience may not know this, but I narrate audiobooks, and I absolutely loved narrating your book last year. It
And you did
has
such a wonderful job.
Oh, thank you so much. Um, it has elements of the macabre, romance, history, art, gender, and identity. So it has something for everyone, I think. Um, and we have a sample here. We can see if we can get it to play. And this is a sample from The Apprentice.
Naples Bay shimmers into view as we approach the coastal city. Liquid sapphires sparkle beneath the sun, creating the perfect foreground for the imposing volcano in the distance. The mere sight of Vesuvius makes me queasy. What if it erupts? I picture torrents of fiery lava shooting up into the smoky sky, deadly orange rivers consuming everything in their path. The world covered in suffocating volcanic ash.
Behold Vesuvius! Isn't it splendid?
Giovanni's words interrupt the terrifying scenario. Studying my face, he perceives,
You're scared of the volcano.
Rubbing my clammy hands, I nod. A little, yes.
Don't be silly, Carlo. Nearly 300 years have passed since the last eruption.
A dramatic sweep of his arm accompanies the somewhat reassuring statement.
Look there. Gardens and forests cover the crater. It may belch a bit of smoke or a rivulet of lava every once in a while, but nothing serious.
That in itself sounds rather serious. Laughing in the face of my solemnity, he waves his hand.
Nonsense. A little lava fortifies the soil.
Are you telling me the truth?
I will always tell you the truth. Of that you can be certain.
Those sincere words, while appeasing my fear, pokes at my guilty conscience. His earnest expression nearly pushes me to confession. Luckily, I'm distracted from such a dangerous folly. An ancient castle stands proudly on the shoreline, flaunting impenetrable walls and solid turrets. What's that?
Castel Nuovo, which served as both home and fortress to the House of Anjou. If my memory serves me well, I believe it dates back to the late 13th century.
Neapolitan fishermen, tanned and leathery-skinned from daily outdoor exposure, watch us with curiosity as we ride our horses parallel to the water. Some of them are casting nets from painted boats, while others shuck clams on the shore. Fishwives wrapped in knitted shawls select squirming anchovies from smaller nets. Beside these women are piles of fish that gleam like silver coins. We steer our mounts away from the bay and veer toward the city. Church bells ring from every direction, announcing the many houses of God. Colorful palazzos, several stories high, compete for space on streets constructed from charcoal-gray lava stone. Laundered linens hang on long poles protruding from windows, the white sheets billowing like giant flags of peace. Overwhelmed, I can't help grinning like a fool as my senses of sight, sound, and smell are simultaneously assaulted. Catching the scent of fried squid, my mouth instantly waters. Doesn't that smell delicious, Maestro?
It does, but we can't stop.
The midday bells are ringing.
We'll eat later.
My stomach growls in protest as we come to a lively piazza. Mothers call out to children, while working men and women sing merrily to pass the time. Fishmongers try to sell their slick, fresh wares from the sea. Palazzos arrayed in shades of rusty orange and ochre drip with various styles of architectural decor: Romanesque, Gothic, Renaissance, and the current Baroque style are layered over each other almost haphazardly. The result is chaotic, yet surprisingly pleasing. Almost every street corner houses a devotional shrine. Virgin Mary icons are honored with candles, flowers in various states of decay, glass beads, and festive ribbons. Paste crowns and colored glass jewels adorn these painted ceramic statues.
Thanks for that.
No, I just can't. I think the greatest pleasure any writer can receive is to have someone breathe life into their work, and you did that so perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to do and great fun. I really enjoyed immersing myself in that. I would listen to sort of Gregorian chant music for the monastic part of the book, and it just you really made that time come to life, and I thought it was wonderful, and it was so great to be part of that.
Well, it's not so much different now. If you go to Napoli, it's that. It's lively. It's layers. It's so much life. Napoli is a great city, wonderful city.
I had the pleasure of going there, but I was about 15 when I went, so I couldn't really fully enjoy it, I suppose. I think as an adult, I would probably have more to observe and enjoy, perhaps. So we'll see. I'll have to go. There are lots of things I could mention about the book, and that I found it hit the same spots as The Thornbirds and The Name of the Rose did, for example. A great deal of the second half of the novel takes place in and around Santa Maria della Sanità, which is a Roman Catholic basilica. Could you tell us about this beautiful place?
Yes. So Santa Maria della Sanità, it was founded, the church that you're seeing in that photo was founded in 1577 and completed in 1617. But the original basilica dates back to the Middle Ages. And, back then it's like you just build things on top of each other. Mm-hmm. And then the catacombs are much, much older. In that neighborhood, it's called Sanità, the quartiere is called Sanità, because it once had an old early middle monastery from the early Middle Ages where they would quarantine sick people. Okay, so the monks would quarantine sick people. And then in the 17th century, they built a hospital on that site called the Ospedale del San Gennaro del Povere, and San Gennaro, or Saint Generius, is the patron saint of Napoli. So like most, as you can see in the photo, like most of the churches in the area, it's Baroque style. They have gorgeous, intarsia marble floors, frescoed ceilings, lots of paintings on the walls. You have the gilding, lots of gold carving. What makes this particular church extremely interesting is the layers of history it has. You've got the ancient catacombs, and then you have the early, the early basilica, and then you have the one that you're seeing in the photo now, and it's just all these layers of history in one place. This is why it just fascinated me, this particular church.
It looks incredible.
Sorry? I said, as if you want, I can proceed and talk about the catacombs. So I was about to go right into the
well,
catacombs.
you mentioned the catacombs, and I think that's going to be really interesting for people. Is this are these the San Gaudioso catacombs?
Yes, yes, and that is the widest corridor because most of the other ones are smaller. And in the book, as I mentioned, a lot of the most important people of of Napoli are buried there in the wide space. But I'm sure you have the question later, so I'll
So
wait.
these,
I'll wait.
all right. So these are located beneath Santa Maria della Sanita, right?
Correct.
Correct. Okay, good.
Yes. So these ancient catacombs, they were sealed. Okay? A massive flood happened in the early Middle Ages, and all of this was sealed. And it
Oh,
wasn't until they began the construction of the current one that another flood came and revealed the underground catacombs. So those catacombs, it also had a crypt, the crypt. It had a chapel there, and it dates back to the Paleo-Christian era, which is 4th to 5th BC. And it's believed that San Guadioso is buried there. And if you're wondering who San Guadioso is, he was a bishop from North Africa who was out at sea. There was a shipwreck, and his body washed up on the shore of Napoli.
oh.
And so once, when they were building this, another flood came, washed all this out. And then they saw that, they believed that God revealed those catacombs. So they viewed, the 17th century monks there viewed this site as extremely holy and important place. It became holy ground because they believed that God, revealed it to the people of Napoli. And then, and the years that followed, people have, of course, our historians, archaeologists, everyone went in there. And we find out now today, if you go on tour, you'll find out that the Paleo-Christian time, that the ancient Christians would go there and with food, and they would sometimes sit in the tombs of their loved ones, and they would worship there because there was an ancient chapel. I mean, it's just a little bit of a terrifying place. And if you're claustrophobic, it's not very pleasant, but it is a fascinating place, loaded with history.
And this reminds me of another cultural similarity, perhaps. Perhaps correct me if I'm mistaken here, but similar to the Mexican Dia de los Muertos.
Yes, very, very similar to Dia de los Muertos. Yes, and I kept saying this to my husband because we have spent time in Mexico City, and there is a cult of the dead there, and it's very, very similar to the cult of the dead in Mexico City. Yes.
That's really interesting. I'm sure there are other cultures around the world that might have something similar. I just don't really know anything off the top of my head, really. But it's very interesting that you can have things like that. Very interesting. I read on the website that the catacombs accept visitors, and visitors can book to explore these. I've never been, though I have visited Naples, as I mentioned earlier, back in 2005. Yes. No, 2001. Oh dear.
It's not very common in touristy. This is something that,
Okay.
our historian nerds do this kind of stuff, but it's not very touristy or advertised. No.
Oh, right. Right. So, yes, you mentioned some disturbing situations in your book, and I was hoping you could tell our audience about the macabre burial practices that took place here.
I'm happy to. And it's one of the things that inspired the book, because in all my travels, I've never heard of anything like this. They certainly did not have this practice in Tuscany. So when you go into the crypt, if you see that photo with the stairwell, it leads right into the old crypt. And on in the crypt, there are these two big rectangular openings in the floor. And that's where the dead would be dropped down. And you had these men who were called the schiattamorti. Okay, these men were called schiattamorti, which schiattamorti in Italian literally means break the dead. And they were condemned criminals. These men were condemned criminals who were given a pardon, not a pardon to get out of jail, but they were given a pardon, a divine pardon, that they would go to heaven instead of hell if they did this job. And what was the job? At the time, the theologians of Napoli believed that our spirits would rise to heaven only after the flesh detaches from our bones after death. So they devised this method of having the flesh detach from the bone faster, like within a year, which normally would take much longer. And the way they would do this is the schiatamorte would break all the limbs, break the arms and legs of the dead, and then shove the body into a niche in one of that was carved into the walls, and then holes were strategically poked in the corpse to allow the body fluids to ooze out, okay? And then after a year, the mummified corpse would be properly interred permanently in one of the either smaller catacomb niches or like the big one in the main corridor where the important people went. Now the schiatamorti, they didn't live long. This is like, if you want to know what the worst jobs in the world were, this would probably in the top 5.
Yes,
imagine you're
ghastly.
It's ghastly. You were stuck in the catacombs, it smelled like dirt. It was damp, dank, dark, with noxious fumes of putrefying bodies. So these men did not last long. They really didn't last long at all.
I'm not surprised. Goodness me.
And the monks were smart because, it's catacombs, so there's limited space. So going to heaven fast became big business, really big business. And nobility paid a fortune. I mean, there's even recorded amounts. It was like vast sums to be buried in the catacombs so they could get to heaven faster.
My goodness. That's incredible.
Yeah,
well,
entrepreneurial spirit.
Indeed. Oh, wow. Well, I'm sure that many of our listeners will not have heard about this tale before. My goodness. But I have something else that listeners will be interested to learn about. Would you please explain to us what the cult of carnality was? What was it about, and how long did it exist?
Okay,
excuse me, just 1 minute. Yes, I should have said this earlier, but little children maybe not the best to listen to the next bit. Okay, thank you.
I'll keep it as PG as I can.
Okay.
So the cult of carnality was founded in 1600, and it almost sounds like a joke, like a priest, a nun, and a solicitor walk into a bar. But that's what it was. It was a priest, a nun, and a solicitor. And the main protagonist of this trio is Giulia Di Marco. Her name is Giulia Di Marco, and she becomes what will later be known as the mother, or sometimes they call her the mouth of the rose. So together with Father Agnello Arcieri, who is recorded in history as being a very handsome priest, he was extremely charismatic, and his friend, a colleague of his that was named Giuseppe Di Vicaris. This guy was a shady character. The three of them convinced the nun to form this cult, and the three of them convinced many people, prominent members of society, that divine glory could be achieved through sexual ecstasy. So the body of Giulia Di Marco became a place of worship. People would have sex with her in order to reach God. And as I mentioned before, Spain ruled Naples, in fact, from 1504 to 1713. And many of the Spanish royal court were converted to this cult, to the point that they sometimes lent their palaces for these cult orgies that they would have. And what I found very interesting doing my research was that by the time they were having these religious, events in the palaces, Julia decided to put a stipulation, an age limit on the men who could commune with her. That no one over 25 could commune with her, which I found very interesting. So naturally, this type of behavior caught the attention of the Holy Inquisition in Rome, and they came immediately to, not immediately, I should say, by 1611 is when they really started putting pressure, and they had to be very careful because some very important people were following this cult, right? So they had to be very, very careful. They couldn't just shut it down because you would mar the reputation of these very wealthy, important people. So it was a gradual thing, but it came to an end in 1615 when the three of them in Rome were brought before justice, and they pleaded guilty, and they were put in prison for life at the Castel Sant'Angelo. And so that's when it officially ended, was in 1615. So you can't, fact is stranger than fiction. You can't make this stuff up.
No.
This book practically wrote itself.
It's incredible because you have two things that are just unbelievable that were actually true. And yes, I was absolutely taken aback by both of those historical bits. But it is very astonishing, I think, that this, as you say, this was stopped by the Inquisition, and yet it had so many prominent members of the Spanish court. And how could that have happened? I mean, how could something so...
Well, he was charismatic. The priest was very, first of all, Julia is described as being very beautiful. The priest was handsome. They were both charismatic. And then you had the shady lawyer, the solicitor, who, probably talked a big game. It's just amazing how and the appeal. Maybe that appealed to some people. I mean, it's not out of the ordinary. I mean, Rasputin in Russia, Rasputin had a sex cult. So they've existed throughout history.
Indeed, that's right. So is Julia a well-known figure in Italy now, or
not at all?
No. Okay.
No, she's really not. And it's one of the reasons I chose her. My first two books were around the Medici. I focused around the Medici, but all my other books, I do my best to find very interesting and compelling figures in history that people don't know about, and I like to drag them out into the light and put a big microscope on them and make them known to people. Julia is not known. She was a young girl. She lost her parents young. She went to go live with family, an extended family. Next thing you know, she's 15. She had a baby out of wedlock. So that could have been from some form of, incest or sexual abuse, or she was raped. Something happened to her. And she gave up her child. And then she took the cloth and became a nun. So this is a woman who had a tragic past, and that's why she was probably easily led into this cult that she was involved in. And the only reason I came across her was because after I did the San Guadioso tour, I was in the gift shop and I was looking at some of the books they had, and there was there was only one copy of it. It was a tiny little book, dusty. And it had like the cult of carnality, 17th century cult of carnality. And I picked it up and I started leafing through it, and it's an Italian book. And I thought, oh my goodness, between the catacombs and this story, I have to do something. I have to write about this. And so I did.
And you did so brilliantly. I think it was definitely one of my favorite books. So
thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoy it.
Thank you.
Thank you for writing it. For those in our audience who are thinking about visiting Naples or Napoli, could you recommend any 17th century places for them to visit, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Aside from everything that we've talked about, the church and the catacombs, you definitely have to go. One of my favorite places to visit is the San Severo Chapel. It is absolutely exquisite. The construction began in 1590, but then it was decorated in Baroque style in the 17th century, and it is filled with incredible artwork, included the famous Veiled Christ, which is sublime. It's a beautiful, beautiful masterpiece. And then you have the Palazzo Real, also 17th century, Baroque, beautiful. It's a sumptuous palace. It belonged to a very wealthy Spanish viceroy. And he's, spared no expense on this palace. It's very grand. give yourself plenty of time to go and visit the apartments. It's gorgeous. And finally, one thing that I mentioned it in another book, in my book, The Imposter, I mentioned the sepulchres of the brothers Filomarino, which is in the Church of Santissimo Apostoli. The church outside is rather plain, but inside it's like a jewelry box. It's very plain on the outside, but inside it's all the splendor of Baroque, and it has one of the most amazing funerary monuments I've ever seen. The brothers Filomarino. There were three young men who were poisoned by their uncle for the sake of inheritance. The mother did not want to portray her sons in death in the typical rest in peace style. So she had their figures, their likenesses sculpted beside their tombs in lively poses. Like one is sitting on the ledge, the other one is standing there. It looks like they're alive and they're about to jump down. I've never seen anything like that. It's beautiful and definitely worth a peek. One of the most stunning pieces I've seen in a long time.
That's great. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure. I can go on and on, but like I said, the best thing to do, walk around Napoli. Just walk around and you'll see everything.
That's great. I think that's a wonderful thing for people to do. Just look around. And that's what some people say. You have to look up in cities too, because you could see not just at ground level, but the edifices and everything up above. You can miss out so much if you don't look up. Of course, be careful when you're walking across the street, of course.
Right.
But
because people are so busy looking in the guidebooks or looking on their phone that they're missing everything.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Yep. In my interview with you last year, I interviewed Christine on my website, The 17th Century Lady, so you could check that out. You said you were working on a new book set in the 17th century. I'd like to know, how's that going? Could you talk to us a bit about that, please?
I'd be happy to. I'm in the editing phase, the final editing phase.
Mm-hmm.
It's the story is of another 17th century Giulia. Her name is Giulia Mangiardi, but she's commonly known as Giulia Tofana. She is from Palermo, and she moves to Rome with her stepdaughter Geronima Spano. And these two women supposedly were involved in a poison ring that led to the death of over 600 men. That we know of. It could be, the number can be much higher. They sold a poison that was tasteless, odorless, colorless, and could be hidden out in plain sight on a lady's vanity as eau de toilette or holy water in a pretty bottle. And it was a slow-acting fatal poison, so it didn't leave a trace. It was the most feared poison of Europe. Even Mozart supposedly was afraid that he had been poisoned by it in the 18th century. Right. This story is incredible, it's the hardest book I've written because poisoners led very low-profile lives naturally, right? Because the poison you be executed. So they led very low-profile lives. So there's very little historical documentation, and the documentation I'm finding in Italian does not match the documentation I'm finding in English. So as a historian and a storyteller, I have to bridge these gaps.
That's very difficult, but I'm sure you can do it.
I'm trying, but I'm telling everybody that I'm researching poison because heaven forbid something happens to my husband and they take my computer. They're going to find all this, like how much arsenic do I need to kill a man? How much foxglove? How much belladonna, nightshade, all oleander, all these poisons. It's like it would incriminate me if anybody dies around me at this period because I'm telling you, the evidence is on my computer.
Oh dear. Mind you, as writers, we have all sorts of stuff in our searches, don't we? So I think that's understandable. Right. Well, I look forward to you finishing that and letting us have a read. That would be really, really good. Another 17th century lady.
Another 17th century lady, another Giulia.
Incredible. Wow. Right. I like to end our show by asking my guest to describe their fantasy Stuart era dinner party. But since we're doing it a little differently today, I'd like to set it in early 17th century Naples this time.
Okay.
Who would you invite? What would you serve?
Okay. I would probably invite Giulia Mongiardi, because it's been so hard getting information from her that it would be nice to sit down with her and talk and get the scoop right from the source. I don't know if I would eat anything in the presence of a poisoner, but I would definitely, no, I wouldn't eat or drink anything in her presence. But I would most likely definitely serve seafood, because in Napoli, the seafood is abundant and delicious. So I would maybe start off with spaghetti alla vongole, or the clams, maybe some shrimp scampi, some grilled octopus, some bacala, some fresh bacala, which is a codfish. Wash it down with a falanghina, which is a wonderful white wine from the region. And dessert would be sfogliatelle, which is the lobster tail filled with ricotta.
Very nice.
That's what I would wear my crown, because I see you're wearing a crown and your daughter had a crown.
Yes,
I'm going to put on
let
my
me
crown.
borrow this today. Excellent.
Yes. I have my little crown full of crooked.
Well, yes. Well, when we have a fantasy dinner party, we have to have ourselves all decked out, don't we?
Yeah. I'm going to put on my crown too.
Fantastic. Oh, wow. So what kind of music would you have playing? Would you have?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know, probably somebody, maybe strumming a lute in the background.
You can't beat a lute. You can't.
No,
yeah.
Maybe a castrati singing. Singing.
That's very Baroque. Very nice.
Yeah, very Baroque. I'll have a castrati.
Lovely. Oh, wow. Well, I've so enjoyed speaking with you today.
Oh,
Christine,
the pleasure was all mine.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, it's just been so delightful. And I knew I was going to have a lovely chat with you. So thank you. And
thank you.
Yeah, so I hope you all enjoyed that. And we'll say bye to Christine for now. And bye. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Don't forget to pick up your copy of de Melo's The Apprentice in either paperback, ebook, or audiobook formats. In August, we will be chatting with the superb historian J.D. Davies. But in the meantime, don't forget to keep it Stuart.